Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art, where we do deep dives into deep cuts and help you understand why damn things matter. I'm your host, Novo Day, and today we're going to be talking about art and music, focusing on the career of the Smashing Pumpkins from 1990 to the year 2000. To hash things out, we're once again joined by our favorite Jack of Lanterns, and that is Mr. Philip Church of philipchurch.com. Welcome back, sir.
That's Philly Corgan.
Philly Corgan. Ooh, I like that. Philly Corgan, guys, is in the house here to give you some sweet harmonies that kind of whine and then go into this interesting, breathy, sensual accents. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm actually more than just a rat in a cage. I just mostly wanted to come on here to clear my name.
Guys, stand down. Disarm.
It's okay. It's like
he doesn't want to bull through. He doesn't want to bulldoze.
I apologize.
Through this like a rhinoceros.
And I apologize to the entire world for calling it a vampire. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. It was just kind of a turn of phrase. And if anything, please forgive me tonight. Tonight
we will. Tonight.
It could be perfect. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I you know what? I adore you saying that.
Well, the more I reflect on it, the more I feel kind of melancholy, but it is what it is.
I don't have any kind of sadness. It is not infinite at all. Do not worry. I'm really happy that we get to talk about the Smashing Pumpkins today. So let's tell the good people why. Why are we talking about the Smashing Pumpkins today? Well, the Smashing Pumpkins are an interesting part of music history, Philip, and that is because they've always been kind of between the lines, so to speak, between any kind of genre or definition. They're their own beast.
Billy Corgan has a lot of emotions, you guys.
Lots.
And as versatile as his emotions are, as are his songwriting skills, which is actually genuinely, like, I think a really big compliment, because the band is far more than just him. Of course, he
Sure.
had it was a full band.
It's an ensemble.
It wasn't called Billy Corgan. It was called the Smashing Pumpkins.
Billy Corgan and the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, Billy Corgan and his Fifis.
Billy Corgan and the Pumpkins does kind of have a weird ring to it. It could have been that.
You know what? It could have been, but luckily they didn't. And I feel like in a way too, there's the aspect of Billy's different sort of takes on music and rock and the things that he sort of made known. And I do feel like his persona was maybe something that he never really foresaw having to really maintain or just that, like, you never know if you're going to blow up. And I feel like when you go from being some Chicago musician to
some
like
kid,
one of the hugest bands in the world in just a few years, that it puts a lot of pressure on you. And it's interesting seeing how that may or may not have affected their trajectory overall. And then, as you mentioned, just their actual impact on music, because they were right there, like, boom, right at 1990, they came out swinging. It's interesting how grunge adjacent they can be, and then sort of turn around and be very, like, tender.
That's why I said they're in between the lines.
There's no one thing that
they
really
carved out a space in music history like no other. They are their own thing. And you know what I like in this episode too, Philip? And this may surprise you, and I'm wondering how you'll react to this. I kind of liken it to our Frank Zappa show, because I have a lot of respect for the Smashing Pumpkins, and I have always liked them a tremendous amount. And I've always supported them. In fact, I saw them live a couple years ago, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But there's something about them where when I was trying to pin them down in terms of how they made their mark in music history, it was difficult, because we all owe them so much respect for doing what they did and giving us this amazing amount of music and art. But I always feel like they're kind of a monolith. And what I mean by that is, you don't hear about, when we cover other acts and they're like, it's often, we often will say, oh, this is the most influential thing because of them, they, all these other things happened. I didn't really feel that way about the Smashing Pumpkins. I can't think of like who they directly influenced, but we know that they did, but in a very broad way and not a direct way. And I feel like it was one of those things that it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but we have to, it's still a perfect subject to cover on our show because it's more about respect for what they did to the art form and what they gave us. Because there's two things in the arts, but particularly music, that I always kind of go back to in terms of, oh, this is why they're so famous. And that is either because some act or band or whomever, musician or ensemble, is either virtuosos, so they're masters of their craft, or they're pioneers, or some sort of combination of both. And though the Smashing Pumpkins did not create alternative music or anything like that, I feel like they perfected it.
I think another thing to give them a lot of credit for is they have a pretty fair amount of really big notable hits, right? That
Oh,
there's
absolutely.
there's a more than just a small handful of songs that when they come on the radio, you know instantly who it is.
Because of that
And
vocal.
and even well, yeah, and then even besides, like, there's variety amongst those big hits to an extent, and then comparing that to their overall rest of their career is actually still, it's almost, to hearken it to a different episode we've done, they're almost like an interestingly like 90s Steely Dan-esque kind of thing, in that
Yeah.
they've got so much breadth and variety, especially even just given their different musical backgrounds of the individual musicians and the things that they've done throughout their, both the Smashing Pumpkins career, but they've all been lifelong career musicians. Even when Smashing Pumpkins wasn't doing music, they each weren't like, oh, I give up on music. They just were like,
Right.
Smashing Pumpkins is over for whatever reason. And then of course that's not the
Yeah,
case
James
anymore.
went into A Perfect Circle,
Right.
and
Yeah.
like they definitely did their own thing, and then they kind of circled back fascinatingly into
Yeah.
the Smashing Pumpkins to continue their career.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah. There's so much to them that it's difficult to pick a defining thing about them, other I don't want to say ironically, but just in an interesting way. The most defining thing about them is and like in no negative or like throwing any kind of shade kind of way, is Billy's voice.
Oh
I
yeah,
one of the things that I couldn't help but really think about
we'll
this
have a
time
whole
around.
segment about that
Well,
voice.
but then maybe I should save it for that. I was
Yeah,
gonna say
save it for that
I have a
because.
thing I was going to say about his voice, but I'll save it.
But I will say this before we go into the background. You're totally right. There is something about the music that they made that became hits that not only shows their musicality in terms of knowing how to make a hit, but also but also kind of feeding into the zeitgeist of the times of the 90s. And that's why, and they made all their hits during this era, and this era was very special, this decade, 1990 to 2000. That's why we're focusing on it today. So of course we're going to do what we always do and talk about their career, their legacy, their history through their art. But before we do, of course, we all need a little background. The band was formed in 1988 in Chicago by frontman, guitarist, and primary singer-songwriter William "Billy" Corgan. The rest of the original lineup consisting of guitarist James Iha, bassist Darcy Retzky, and drummer Jimmy Chamberlain. Though the focus of today's episode is already stated will be on their first decade of their career, 1990 to 2000, where they made 6 studio albums and a very famous EP, there is more to their history, and we will touch upon that a little bit as well. So to date, they've actually gone on to release 13 studio albums as a whole, selling millions of records along the way and going on to win a number of awards, including 2 Grammys, solidifying their place in music history. Now, guys, there's a lot to dig into, a lot of juicy middle to discuss. But before we do, we're going to take a little break, hear from our sponsors. Stay with us.
Support for this show is brought to you by novel Till the Bitter Endemic. What if there was a happy ending to a pandemic? Perhaps an unexpected love story. After Daisy gets thrust into mandatory quarantine for an infection she can't explain, it's up to her to unravel the truth as to what's behind it and what she can ultimately do to escape it. But she can't do this alone, and that's where she finds not only herself, but a very special person that opens their heart for the betterment of their survival. Find out how in Till the Bitter Endemic. Available now on Amazon in all major formats.
Philip, it's time to do the damn thing. And we're going to do what we always do. And we're going to give the good people a musical primer. And don't worry, I'm not going to let you forget let's start with Billy Corgan's vocal, because this is how I would describe it. When I write my little notes to myself, I've described it this way. It is a pendulum. It's a pendulum of harmonic whining falsettos and sensual, breathy vocal lines.
It's so interesting when somebody who is as prolific a songwriter and musician as Billy Corgan has such a unique and sort of off-brand voice, if you will, because so many people have probably gone to, whether it's just LA or New York in general, right? Just the huge cultural hotspots of America, or even just whatever local, just shopping their record demo around, even if they're not in a big city. But how many people do you think were rejected for being like, oh, you just don't have it, or like you don't have the sound, you don't have that X factor?
Oh, a
And the
million
fact
billion.
that Billy Corgan's got that everyman approach of just like this man's not going to win a contest. Again, I don't mean that in a shitty way, because I'm nowhere close to an amazing singer myself. If you love the thing, you do it, and it's a
But there
good
was
thing that he
strong
did.
musicality there too,
There's a
though.
ton of musicality, and that's the good thing, is that the
Hence the
songwriting in general is so
harmonics.
strong that his voice being a bit sort of atypical of a gigantic smash success doesn't matter. And one of the things that I also sort of wonder, and I was like, I wonder if anybody's ever experimented with this, or if I would ever dare to do it, which I'm not going to, let's just be honest. But if you replaced Billy Corgan's voice, how like significant of a change that would be, and what that would do to the overall just sort of soundscape
Oh my
of
god,
it in
it would
general,
completely change it.
right? Because it's like there's so much variety in the every other aspect of the songwriting, between, again, just tempos, like actual textures, distortion levels, the instrumentation itself of just some songs being just Billy and a guitar, other things having like full backing, like strings,
Yeah,
or
like
other kind of like
Tonight Tonight.
synths, and yeah, like there's so much other stuff going on that it's really interesting that it's still
Well, that vocal is the connective
it
tissue
is, exactly.
to it all to
It
make
is
it
the
so unique.
central piece. It is
Yeah.
just the irreplaceable part of it. And so it's a really good sort of booster. And to the point that I think we were kind of alluding to in the intro part, is that it's hard to make a direct correlation with their impact, other than just hopefully inspiring a bunch of other people to go, who fucking cares if you're not going to win The Voice or be on American Idol? Go do your
We
damn
talk about that
thing.
all the time. Yeah.
Write your fucking songs, write your stories,
Re the
tell them, act, who
strokes,
cares? Yeah, like
like it doesn't
it's not
matter.
about fitting a mold. Make the mold. Be the thing that you want to see or hear. And it's good that he did. And so yeah, it's really interesting how, like you said, sometimes it is whiny. Sometimes it's way more chill and emotional. It's like he's actually, even within his own realm of Billiness, he's got good range, and really knows what he's doing, and clearly had a lot of intention.
He has a lot of control over his own voice, that is clear, and he does what is called vocal gymnastics. He really plays with the dramatics of it. I am more curious about this. I know he's a huge fan of the show, so eventually, when we get to do an interview
William,
with
props.
William, when we get to do an interview with him, my first question will be this. But in the meantime, you get to stand in for William, and you get to answer Philip, and that is this: do you choose to make your vocal that way, or is that natural when you sing? That's how it comes out. Which is it?
I, funny enough, think this is natural for him. And one of the
Ah,
things that really strikes me as thinking that it's natural is how he pronounces certain words. Knowing what I know about like his background, especially them having formed in Chicago and where they're sort of from, the way that he says certain words, it's so funny. Like people will be like, "Oh, listen to this band. Do they sound English or British?" And just it's so interesting how people's influences weigh on what their vocal choices tend to be. How you can almost tell, for instance, that like Green Day grew up listening to like punk and British people, just
yeah.
by the way that he talk. Like go listen to them talk, and then go listen to them sing, and you're like, that's a really fucking weird difference. And there's times where he says
I
things
thought they
like,
were British before
well, the other funny
before
what
we realized they were
I would have,
American.
yeah, exactly. Again, the Brit punk, the like growing up on stuff like Of course, now that I want to think about it, it's my fucking brain these days. Don't get old, anybody. But yeah, it's funny. You can
It's
almost
not for
hear like the
weenies.
Clash and other stuff of being like, "Wow, you guys, are you British?" And it's like, no, they just loved it, obviously. But with Billy's voice, it's really funny how he'll say things like, "And what do you want?" Like it's Southern.
Yeah,
There's really interesting strands of Southern with Billy specifically. And of course, he's the only one ever singing, but like their musical background with the way that they came together and how like the drummer was way
absolutely.
more into jazz and big band.
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
it's so neat knowing these little tidbits about who they were as individuals and then what they were able to do together as a whole band of just exploring all their stuff because
Absolutely.
there's such diversity that again they've got that Steely Dan aspect of you might know the hits, you can go turn on the radio and listen to their top 10 songs, but if you go flip through their albums and actually take some time to listen there, you're like, wow, a lot of this is not what I would have expected. Like, the radio hits are hits for a reason. There's so much more variety and depth to a lot more of the other stuff. It wasn't like the big hits.
And you make a good point. In my head, when I was trying to replace his vocal with just any old, vocal like of the time, let's say it was something shitty like Creed or Nickelback or something like that. It would, because I mean the musicality is great, but there is something and that's probably why I said in the thesis they didn't necessarily create a brand new sound, but man, did they perfect it, because you could probably add a new vocal and it would sound like a lot of other music at the time, because it wasn't necessarily like revolutionizing a lot of things, but it was perfecting it. And we probably see that. We can probably start the discussion with their art and their discography, and we see that with LP1 1991's Gish, which is the when you hear this for the first time, it was all of them in a room recording this old school analog style, because there's no compression. Like, it is so, like, the mix is so late 80s early 90s, but that has a charm to it, it has such a place in music history in and of itself. And Gish is, the original conception for the show. We're trying in our professional pitch meetings. I wanted to do the whole show on Gish because it's not covered enough. Because this one, like, my brother, who's probably my biggest musical inspiration, who's got me into a lot of the stuff, reason probably why we have this show. And I definitely agree that Smashing Pumpkins is a perfect addition to the progeny of shows we do. This is his favorite album, is Gish. So I grew up listening to this as a kid.
It's for being 1991, it is quintessentially 90s as fuck.
Yeah, and the
It's
blueprint for Smashing Pumpkins is
it
there.
really is.
You
Again,
could see how he liked to write and what he wanted to do. He just was not perfect yet. But we were
yeah,
getting
when
there.
I say they came out swinging, this is really what I mean. That like if you think you would like them at all, you're not necessarily going to be surprised by their first album, but in the best way possible of like you're getting a lot more of what you thought you were going after. That there wasn't like a weird like, oh, how long did it take them to no, they've been Smashing Pumpkins from day one. Yes, none
Absolutely.
of their big hits are on this one because, sometimes it takes like a try or two, but all it took them was just one further album. Like by the time they got to Siamese Dream,
Yeah,
they were
1993.
everywhere. And that's where you've got like Quiet and Today and Cherub, or like
I
even
feel like
within the
Today
top
was the
five.
first one, though. That was like, to me, in my mind, that was the first like hit. And I think I
And
remember him
Disarm.
in
I mean, again, like
Disarm.
this second album has like three of their like top, again, like go look up the top radio hits of Smashing Pumpkins. They did that within like 3 years of them like putting out albums, 2 years technically, because again, Gish came out in 91, Siamese Dream came out 93, so
1993.
2 years
Yeah.
apart. Obviously the same people writing it, and that's that cohesion. This is that like solid front man who knows what he's doing with his lyrics and his voice, but has a fucking power like house behind him. Because again, these other musicians were not screwing around. But yeah,
Oh,
Gish
yeah.
was excellent. Gish is, for anybody who has ever given somewhat of a shit about the Smashing Pumpkins, or even if you just got time to spare, it's 10 tracks. It's not going to like, it honestly is a great way to just like spend some time and just realize like, yeah, you know what? Follow your fucking dreams. Just because like this they came out of nowhere, had a good first album, and then went on to be like pop culture icons.
Definitely, and I feel like that was
They were on The
quickly
Simpsons.
solidified with Siamese Dream. Like, it was almost immediate. I remember when I saw the video for Today and hearing Today, and and then with that Billy Corgan, vocal aesthetic being being so drawn to it. There's a gravitas to it and a
It's the
gravity to
greatest
it. It
day
is the greatest
I
day of
have
our lives.
ever really known.
And it was when I read, interviews with him about their history, or see interviews with him, they often will say that this was them doing their version of a pop song. And it kind of makes sense, because it's still like this rocking alternative 90s track, but compared to Gish, you will see that okay, they're maturing essentially.
If you know stuff like music theory, it's interesting. I remember a lot of the chord progressions were sort of non-standard, and it was
Mhm.
interesting as I went, back through their discography for the sake of really boning up for the show. It's something that never, with that lack of studious listening before,
Yeah.
I never really caught it. Billy does a good job of bucking a lot of trends of not following the same like 1 4 5 1, like sort of a lot of
Sure.
just the classic like rock and roll ish like pop music chord
Like
progressions.
Beatles, if you know three chords, you can write a
Yeah,
song.
pretty much. So like that's the interesting thing is that today is probably some of the closest that you will get to that. That song, what it doesn't surprise me at all to hear like that was sort of them maybe being like some like fat cat behind the desk with a cigar being like, hey, maybe do something for the kids, like fucking we'll sell you a bunch of records, like whatever that guy was saying. At least Billy was like, okay, like I'll do it my way. Because it's still, again, it's a good damn song. I actually used to cover this in my bar when I would just play music in bars on the
You
weekends for
cover
money.
today?
I did today, absolutely.
Nice.
Because people love it. It's a great damn song.
It is a great time
And
song.
it's funny enough, too, it's like the front is loaded. Again, Cherub Rock, Today, Disarm, all within the first 6 tracks. I loved Silverfuck. Always have. From this album, Silverfuck is badass.
Are you a Smashing Pumpkins super fan?
No.
We didn't know it.
No, not a super fan by far, but just in the same vein that, like I said, I will always advocate for Steely Dan and be like, I bet you didn't know how much you actually
So
like
there
this
is a
band.
respect thing. Like just
Absolutely.
like me.
Yeah.
Like I don't necessarily love the Smashing Pumpkins. I really, really like it. It's close to love. Like I'm like 98, 99% there. I just cannot seem to push myself over the cliff. But man, do I goddamn respect them.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever truly sat down and been like, you know what I want to hear right now? Some Smash. Like I don't think I've ever done that technically. But I've also never complained. It's never been a like, oh God, Smashing Pumpkins, or if anyone's ever been like, hey, can I put on Smashing? I've never been like, no. I'd be like, oh fuck yeah, let's throw whatever you want, because I knew that it would be something that I could just casually enjoy because it's good shit. Again, like I like rock and roll. I'm okay with like slower stuff and alternative approaches to rock and roll. So even when you're talking about like the super grungy, distorted ass, like faster beats, really like just a grinding shit is awesome. And then turning around and hearing Billy's softer side is also very welcome of just like there's a
Yeah.
good diversity. They're not so far from one trick ponies. And I like that that's what they just continue to go on and do, because they only ever waited a few years between any given album.
And when I really studied his output, or their output as a band and ensemble, I realized, he's probably like a Paul McCartney, where he has so much music in his head and his muse hits him so easily, that there's so much output to Smashing Pumpkins. Like Pisces
Iscariot.
Iscariot? Okay. Pisces Iscariot 1994 is billed as an EP. It's an hour
It's
long.
a full ass. Yeah,
It's
it's
an
14
L
tracks.
it's a full ass
And this doesn't
LP
feel
in
like
my eyes.
B-sides. This isn't like,
Yeah.
oops, like we almost wrote these, but didn't. It's like, no, they clearly put the time into it. And this, like, they were in the studio and were like, don't stop, like, keep recording. Like, what are you doing?
Well, and I felt like I got to know who they were as artists and musicians from just their output, not only trying to understand the music they made, but the sheer volume of it, I think was telling. And I started to think about the fact that there are some musicians that have a hard time with what I call restraint, where sometimes I would listen to tracks. I'm like, maybe that would have been better in an EP or on a B-side single. But for Billy, and this is probably why I compared him to our Frank Zappa episode, you kind of got what you got. He would put kind of everything front and center. It's like, well, this is what I've been working on this year. Enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, it is another. If you've listened to almost any other episode of this show with me on it, you've probably heard me say, "Just do the damn thing, make the art." And this is exactly why this came up in our the pitch meeting, that I mean, yes, Novo almost decided to not land the helicopter that day. He said, "I'm not landing for this." I said, "Please." I flagged him down. I got the signals out, and I waved him down onto the roof
You
of
like put
our penthouse.
handcuffs on me,
Um,
tackled me to the ground.
but it did not take long. I feel like for me to actually kind of get the point across of like, hey man, like I think this would be a really cool conversation. Because I mean, it really is like
Yeah,
once you sit
you
down,
were right.
this is
I was wrong.
very.
You were right.
I mean, I thank you for saying that. That's not what I wanted, but I won't not take it. Um, but yeah, that's it. Really is one of those things that I think because it smacked me so hard of being like, I went on a weird like Smashing Pumpkins kick, and I was like, you know what? Why don't we talk about this on the show? And I kind of feel like it probably didn't take too long for you to be like, yeah, you know what? Like Philip actually had a good idea for once. No, I'm kidding.
You have a lot of good ideas.
I have
Don't
some.
beat yourself up.
I don't.
And then we get to the 90s era, 90s version of The Wall, 1995's Melancholy and the Infinite
Right.
Sadness. And I feel like this was as big as The Wall. You know, it's a very talk about lack of restraint. This is a double LP over 2 hour double disc album, or I guess in
Well,
our
that's
world of
the original one.
Spotify, 2 hour one. Yeah, the deluxe is 4 discs, I believe now.
5.
It's 5?
The
Oh my
fucking
god.
deluxe is I remember being like, "Oops, I downloaded
Jesus
the wrong
Christ.
one," because I was like, "I didn't I listen to this?" Like, and it's like, "Oh,
Now,
this
but
is their
that
really
is
much
also
rehearsal version."
demos. That's not
I know, that's the thing. So
the
it was
shiny final
yeah.
products.
So the remastered one is the one to listen to. But yeah, I mean, 28 and again, not that much time in between. They did 91, 93, 94 with their first,
And
and
then
then all they did was
95.
just 2 years. So
Yeah.
the output literally 3 fucking years in a row, 93, 94,
And you
95.
saw the maturity there again. I feel like this was another level of like, okay, we're really maturing as songwriters
Yes,
here,
this is really when you
especially
could
with
tell.
LP disc 1. I feel like with the first disc was 0 and
Well, Tonight, Zero,
Tonight, yeah.
Butterfly Wings and stuff, like Cupid
I feel
Deluxe.
like that really I mean, I would have been satisfied with just that, and then they gave us a whole 'nother album worth of music.
And it was interesting too. I feel like this is the point, and actually, I guess I forgot to look this aspect of it up. Of the producers for these albums,
I'm
if
pretty
this is
sure it's
them.
Butch Vig. So
Okay,
Butch Vig is the drummer for the band Garbage.
okay, I was gonna say that name
Um,
sounds really
yeah,
familiar.
Butch Vig. Actually, I've been I've been trying to do a show on Butch Vig, and the people that really know producers well are either not available or too shy to come on. So like we've done shows on producers like Brian Eno, but Butch Vig, so Butch Vig, before he made it big just with his own act, Garbage, he was a prolific producer. He's also the producer
He
of
did Nevermind.
Nevermind. Exactly. Yeah.
Like again, talking about '90s
The
gold.
greatest album of all time, or one of them. One of the greatest albums of all time, Nirvana's Nevermind. And so that's why the drums are so big. If you because
Yeah,
he's a drummer by trade.
his
And so
appreciation for drums
yeah.
and then the actual like dope ass background
Because
and
if you
skills of
think
Jimmy Chamberlin,
yeah,
that was like a match made in heaven.
Jimmy's like, though he does have, like you said, those jazz roots, he really brought to the table that big bombastic drum sound, even though he's kind of a straightforward one. And it's deceptive because if you actually listen to a lot of what he's doing, like if they're just isolated lines, you're like, oh, wow. Okay. There's a lot going on there, but he's good about adding it to the needs of the song and
Yeah,
not
there's a lot
trying to
to it.
shine.
But yeah, I feel like Melancholy was them having really leaned into the relationship of having established that with Butch and just being like, dude, have we got some stuff for you? Because this one was again like bigger in just even it feels like even in terms of production, with just the amount of accompanying types of tracks. It's again, Gish was very much for people like your rock and roll, quartet. Drums, guitar, bass, lots of distortion, good shit. Again, tonight is one of their big hits. So just for the audience's sake of picking something recognizable, think about like the strings in the background, how like iconic it is to that hit, and how that really helped the momentum and the like breadth of the song just make it big. And then to go back to the drums, of how the momentum was also very much established, because this is not, you don't think about, I don't think about the guitar in this song. I think about the lyrics and slash the singing. I think about the strings in the background, and I think about the drumming. That's a really interesting thing to think about, considering this was a traditional rock band just 4 years ago doing Gish. Again, like it's a really cool growth pattern. And then the fact that there's the 2 albums or 2 discs, I mean, to this like release, And the other funny thing too is that they have big hits on the first one, and then I think what could be one of their biggest of 1979 is from disc 2 of this. And when you get to
And
disc 2,
33. I forgot how much that was like a sleeper hit single, and I loved that track. And that was kind of like a 1979. It's really slow and
oh yeah,
sweet.
that's right. That is a good one. Yeah, again, another tender moment from
Tender,
Billy.
yes.
But yeah, it's
But they
interesting
would
because
lean
I
into
remember
like the
when
metal side too.
yeah,
Sometimes he would just
that
like
first track on disc 2
you
where
would get
Boys Fear to
that
Tread was like
shredding
weirdly
vocal, growl.
yeah, it was very deconstructed feeling at first. I remember I legitimately had to stop and go, "What the fuck? Did I do something wrong?" Because it finished disc 1, and then so when then the disc 2 started up with Where Boys Fear to Tread, and I was like, obviously I'm still listening to just to Smashing Pumpkins, but it was just like a different vein. It's of their songwriting. It
I
was
have a
indicative.
producer correction for us.
Ooh.
It was not Butch Vig on this album. I was thinking of the first two albums before this. It was Alan Moulder and a artist that goes by the moniker Flood.
Ah.
I was thinking of Butch Vig from his previous
Yeah,
albums.
Gish and Siamese Dream for sure. Okay, yeah, I guess there was a lot to try to pack into this one, and we didn't talk about this too long ago, but whatever it was, then I feel like they maybe out of having the relationship with Butch at first, then they realized that you can trust a producer, that they're like the secret fifth Beatle, if you will, sometimes, and that I
Absolutely.
guess maybe the studio really pitched it of like, no guys, trust me, we've got some good ones for you this time. I know it's not Butch, but like just
Well, Flood is like again going back to us wanting to cover producers, the people behind the scenes too that need more spotlight. Flood is one of the most prolific producers of the 90s and a little bit on into the thousands as well. Like we wouldn't have Nine Inch Nails without Flood. There was so much that he
oh,
did.
Sneaker Pimps, yeah.
Yeah, there was so much that he did was like Jesus Christ, is he this master engineer and producer that, like to your point, did become this like fifth or sixth member to the band.
Yeah, this is iconic album. The like
Absolutely. This was
for somebody with
huge
as many big
in
hits,
1995.
4 of their biggest, most recognizable tracks are granted again it's a 2-disc release, but still to have 4 hits and 4 of their largest from a single release is saying something. So yeah,
I would say this is the top of the pyramid for their
and
career.
that's part of why when I was pitching it
Like
too, I
this
was
is
like,
the most
we don't
famous.
necessarily need to talk about all of it because it's interesting that by the time you get to again, Adore is still great, and which is basically the
I
next
love
one.
the door.
Adore
Yeah.
is fantastic, and
Yeah.
Machina felt like the fucking because the 2000s had that weird like all the Y2K,
It
all the
was a
hacker
weird
shit, the cultural
return to
shift
form
going
though, I thought
on.
too, was Machina,
Yeah,
1 and
Machina
2.
was strange.
Let's talk about Adore first
Yeah,
because
we need to. Yeah,
Adore
I don't
in
mean to skip over
1998,
Adore.
I think a lot of people felt like they wanted we all know what they wanted because the audience is always the same this way. They wanted more Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and Smashing Pumpkins didn't give that to him. They gave him this electronic
They kept
suite
growing.
of they gave him this electronic suite of more middle of the road kind of compositions. And this was actually, I will say this in the defense of people that was like, I wanted Melancholy again, was I brought up the Restraint thing with the 1994's EP because this is Adore, though I loved probably, I want to say 75% of it. I think they did add a couple of tracks that were not necessary for the strength of the overall album. It needed to be like a really tight 45 minutes. And again, he gave us so many tracks. We went over an hour worth of music. I think Adore should have been like a tight 45. And there was towards the end of the album, I was like, this could have been a B-side. This could have been a B-side, or a standalone EP that fit together in a smaller outing than this full LP. But overall, Adore, though, again, it was not back to basics. It
It was an
wasn't
intentional shift.
it wasn't pushing into the Melancholy sound further. It was somewhere in the middle of those two worlds, but with this emphasis on let's experiment with different textures and sounds and electronica at this point. And I would say, what I and Ava adore, like the singles were still like quintessential Smashing Pumpkins, but elevated to this new level. And I still really loved that sound, but I can see why most of the people were kind of, they turned away suddenly.
Yeah, what you'd gotten up to this point was album after album of relatively straightforward, again, four piece. Yes, with a little more production here and there throughout the years as they continue to be successful. That's what you get, is you get a bigger budget. And so they had good producers, again, adding things like, certain kinds of strings and certain interesting like mixing techniques. And like one of them had like an interesting sort of like, I don't even know how to describe it, but there was just, you can tell that they're growing more organically. And this was an intentional shift. This was hey, it's the late 90s. People fucking love like, leather and lasers and fucking synths. Again, we're approaching the Matrix and stuff.
We
I mean, literally
still like
consider the
that.
fact that like this is right around the same time that
I
the
still
Matrix
like
came out.
that.
And the funny
Yeah.
thing too is that, like I said, they were pop culture icons. They had been on they literally were on TV, tons of like
Everywhere.
not even just performing as them. I still remember being a kid and then being on that episode of The Simpsons about like where Homer becomes like a circus freak, and they're touring in the same town or something, and he like meets the Smashing Pumpkins, and they're just on it as just like, hey, we're the Smashing Pumpkins. It was pretty funny. So they had a lot to deal with. They literally became something so different in a span of just a few years. I mean, yes, 7 technically from 1991 to 1998, but that's not that long of a time. And like I said, they were producing the whole time. They were continuing to put out their output, but then also there's like stuff. I mean, these are people with real lives. Billy Corgan's mom had died. He had gone through a divorce. The culture itself was changing.
And there is we talk about this on other shows sometimes. There is such a thing as the curse of success. They became so big with Melancholy that once every band tries to recreate that magic. Like, how do I make that album again to be that big again and continue to propel my career forward? And when they don't get it, often happens with these big acts and bands, it'll strike a chord in you. It'll hit you on a personal level, like, oh, the audience doesn't love us anymore, even though they try to do something different. And I think that's why we got Machina 1 and 2, the Machines of God and the Friends and Enemies of Modern Music, because it was kind of a return to form, and there was an excessive amount of output. I mean, Machina 1 was a regular LP, but Machina 2 was I think a triple LP, or no, it was a double LP with 3 EPs. Jesus fucking tap dancing Christ.
Another interesting thing to interject here too is one of the very famous pop culture moments around Billy Corgan was mid 90s, when he was pretty widely known as saying like rock and roll is dead, like rock guitar is dead. He was clearly going through something himself of having, dedicated himself to this craft so hard. And interestingly, guess what band's guitarist was the one with whom he had this conversation? It was actually Troy Van Leeuwen of Queens of the Stone Age. They were collaborating on a project, and that was very much like how a lot of this started, of just being like, dude, guitar is over, electronic music is coming. Like, it really got to Billy a lot. And interestingly, that this was around the time that Troy from Queens of the Stone Age was doing side projects too. He was actually doing Perfect Circle, with Maynard from
with
Tool.
Maynard, and
so there was a lot of interesting shit
and
going
the
on.
other
The 90s
Billy
was a fucking weird time. Think about how it began, of being this weird pseudo 80s shit. Think about how the 80s ended, and then how the 90s just like boom, it hit again. Like, we had grunge and we had all this stuff.
Nirvana's Nevermind just completely stopped hair metal overnight, and the era of grunge and 90s era alternative music began.
And even that, because that was such a smash hit and just redirected lots of trajectories, I think that's why, given all the technological change in the 90s, not even just the internet and stuff, being its primordial days, but actual electronic music, of really the rise of stuff like techno and electronica, that it was pervasive. And it wasn't just Billy that felt these things. He just was one of the biggest names and voices of the time. So for him to have said this, it was like a weird death knell in a way, that I think he just felt something between, he felt like maybe his genre was being sort of sapped,
like dying
and leached
away, or
and again, and then his like personal life too. Again, his mom died around this time. He went through a divorce and stuff. Like, a lot of weird shit happened, and he embraced it and he did things differently, and that's what you get was, again, still a good album with, hey, one of their top hits. You still have Perfect, but also Ava Adore. Like, really, this is still good stuff. Like,
That's why I think they went back to basics. They're like, okay, we didn't quite take something to the next level with Adore, you know, but let's go back to basics with these concept albums of Machina 1 and Machina 2. And I think because they still saw the trajectory going a little downward, and they were, to your point, a lot of a lot of different things were going on in their personal lives, and you just get burnt out afterwards, and it creates this perfect storm of, maybe we should break up. Like, do we want to keep doing this anymore? And I don't think they ever formally broke up, but there was, I think it was labeled as they disbanded or something. Like
yeah,
to your
like a
point earlier, like they all kind of did their own thing for a while.
like a prolonged hiatus or something, just like
Yeah,
without much of a deadline or any kind of timeline, I should say, in mind. Because I mean, yeah, just major releases every 2 years, if not less. And then, of course, major releases come with tours, and then there's press outside of actual tours, and then there's them playing on shows, on talk shows, and it had to have been a lot. I mean, it really would be enough to burn most people out, which is why, of course, you've got tons of, drug addicts and drug abusers in the music world, of just people who you would think like, oh, this person was so great, they, oh, oops, they got corrupted. And it's pervasive, and you go through dark times, and next thing you know, some dude's there with like a bag of powder. So it's like, at least they didn't, I mean, and the Jimmy
it
Chamberlain, the
got
drummer,
dark.
had some issues as
Yeah, he had a
well.
famous drug
Yeah,
problem.
so I mean,
Absolutely.
it was bad. It wasn't like there weren't things happening to them. And then, of course, as just regular ass human beings who happen to be like sort of rock gods at the time, it affected them in a lot of ways. So I mean, you can't blame them for being like, hey, look, this has been a fantastic 10 years. We're all rich probably for the rest of our fucking lives. Can we just take
Absolutely.
a breather? Let's just breathe.
And it was the end of an era, really. When you think of 1990 to 2000 and all of that output, all this amazing music and art they gave to the world, with not only the music but all the aesthetics around it. The music videos have become iconic, and everything around it. And it kind of was this end of an era, and it did at least open the door to a whole new generation of artists to come after them. And what's crazy is that, though our focus today is on that era, that 1990 to 2000s, when they were the biggest and most influential of their career, they got the itch eventually again. And though we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, I think it is important to the conversation to kind of say that they rebanded
Yeah.
after they disbanded. In 2007 they made Zeitgeist. In 2012 they made an album called Oceania. 2014 was Monuments to an Elegy, and 2018 was Shiny and Oh So Bright Volume One, No Past, No Future, No Sun. Now this is when, me and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, TV Del Rio, we went to go see them live, and I will say this, because I thought this was like, oh, they're kind of like this is like kind of, I don't think they had toured for a while. I remember thinking that, and remember thinking like, this is kind of like a reunion in a tour. Maybe this is the end of, really the end of the road. I may never get to see them again ever if I don't catch them now. So we did make the effort to go see them. We actually drove to a nearby city about 90 minutes away to see them. And I will say this, the Smashing Pumpkins not only put on a goddamn amazing show for their fans, you get your money's worth. It was over 3 hours long. In fact, we left early because, since it was one of those mini road trips where it's far enough to feel like, oh, we're really making the effort to go see this band, but not too far that we couldn't drive home the next day or the same night and not have to stay into the next day. It was like getting close to like midnight or something. It's like, we gotta let the dog out tomorrow. That feeling of like, we better get on the fucking road. So we left early. I actually had to look at their set list to see what we missed. And they're like, I think they did 3 encores. Like, it was just like
Jesus.
one of those kind of shows where it's like, man, they're not getting any younger, but man, they want to give you so much as a band, which is so. And they, of course, they had, since it was like they have that legacy career now, and they were able to do a big venue, it was at an arena. It wasn't like a small venue or anything like that. So of course you got all these fascinating visuals and light shows, and it was very quintessential Smashing Pumpkins. So definitely support them, even if you're like us, where you're not like so in love with them, you listen to them every day, but you have that level of respect for them that you just is rare in music history, where you know there's something special about this group. From there, in 2020, they made Sire. 2022, Adam, a rock opera in 3 acts, and just this year, 2024, Agori Mori May, I guess. Agori Mori May.
I believe so. It's the best I could do.
And I will say this: I haven't listened to a ton from the second era, if you will, of their career, but it's Smashing Pumpkins. You'll probably, if just kind of to our point of like, they were already Smashing Pumpkins with Gish. They're gonna still be smashed. There's still gonna be that DNA there, and you're probably gonna fall in love all over again.
I heard, and I think, to be perfectly honest, that hearing, oh, guess who just put out a new album, that it's actually pretty solid. If you like them, you should check it out. I think that's kind of what put that bug in my ear, was that, like, guess who's
Their
still
new
at
album.
it? Yeah, just like
Yeah.
Billy Rock is Dead Corgan, who gave up on the Pumpkins, but then was like, God damn, I miss it. Zwan is not cutting it. Let's do it again. Again, he can't quit it, and you can't blame him when you look at what he's been able to do with it. When you look at how there's clearly was one fucking thing that Billy Corgan was meant to do, and it was to be a rock musician. He's embraced all kinds of change. He's seen stuff for what is now over 30 something years. And he's never stopped. Just because he stopped doing Smashing Pumpkins, which he admittedly also missed at the time. Even he said, again, like during Zwan, he was just like, you know what? This is not going to be Smashing Pumpkins. And I feel like that's kind of what I always am going to feel like, that was like the thing that I was meant to be doing. So guess what they did is, after a few years, like not too long of not being there, which, yes, it wasn't the exact same lineup as before, but it sucks when you've got somebody as powerful and recognizable of a frontman as Billy Corgan. You might be the musician that's kind of forgotten, because when you say Smashing Pumpkins, you think of that bald dude who sounds kind of whiny sometimes, who looks a little emo in some of his videos. He really is it, though, to at its absolute heart and core. The other musicians, of course, they had a big part of it. Again, I do not mean to take away at all from their accomplishments and any of their contributions, but it's really hard to argue with the fact that you would not have the Smashing Pumpkins without Billy Corgan.
With that being said, let's tie a bow on this B and tell the good people why. Why is the Smashing Pumpkins from 1990 to 2000 so very important to music history?
They were quintessential 90s in so many different ways. And while, as we've said earlier, it's really hard to keep a finger on the pulse of where their influence led, who it touched, it's impossible to say that they didn't influence a lot and touch a lot. Even if you aren't the biggest fan, it's really hard to hate what is just really good music at its core. It's really hard to argue with the amount of success and the amount of just gigantic hits that they have. And that, to borrow from my own sort of bullshittery earlier, to an extent that I've been thinking about as we've approached this episode, is that it's not as weirdly varied and as interesting of a story, but I will stick by calling them the Steely Dan of the 90s to an extent, with the amount of variety that they were able to.
I didn't see that coming.
Again, just prolific as hell, constantly putting out albums. I mean, that's, there's enough boxes. If you put them up side by side, it's interesting. They tick enough of the similar boxes to where Steely Dan did their shit in the 70s and the Smashing Pumpkins did their shit in the 90s. And it really comes down to the core members and the people. And that even though each, band had their members split off, they're still quintessentially the people themselves are very much the band. So if you don't know you like them yet, or if you've never given them a chance, it's probably a great time to realize that, like, wow, this is a band that I didn't realize how much I could have liked, and I never realized just how much of an influence they truly had. There's a reason that if you go back and watch however many movies or TV shows from the 90s, they're in that soundtrack.
Speaking of that, we forgot a amazing set of tracks from remember Batman and Robin? George Clooney, Batman
yes.
and Robin. They made some singles. They were commissioned to make some singles.
They did like a song.
The end is the
beginning
beginning
is
of
the
the
end.
end, and the beginning of the end is the beginning. I love those goddamn tracks. And those were, talk about quintessential
They
90s
don't really
with
write
George
bad
Clooney as
music.
Batman and Robin. The only good thing to come out of that was the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, they don't really make bad shit, man. Like it's fantastic stuff to check
You're
out.
so
Even if just the experience of having
strange.
of just being able to say, I sat down and listened to it all, and I get it.
I get it.
You
Yeah.
probably won't come away from it angry or upset at all. Maybe it won't blow your mind, but it'll be a fun ride. It'll really take you back.
It'll be a fun ride. And there you
Wanna
have it,
go for a
guys.
ride?
The Smashing Pumpkins from top to bottom, 1990 to 2000. I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank, of course, my guest for joining us today, Mr. Philip Church. But before we go, we got a little extra for you, a little icing on the cake, a little cherry on top of what we call the Gym of the Week. Before we talk gyms, guys, we're going to talk sponsors. Today's gyms are brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is our go-to tool for remote podcast recordings. What's great is that you can record separate audio and video tracks, and it's all backed up on a secured cloud, so you never lose your hard work. Even better, it's easy to use, and there's nothing to download. So go to zencastr.com and use promo code Art of the Beholder, all one word, and get 30% off your first 3 months with the pro account. Now back to the gyms. Mine is I just have one. It's Astrobot. I've been playing me some Astrobot
Ooh,
on
that's a fun one.
PS5, and I didn't realize how much I had been wanting a Super Mario Odyssey like platformer. And my God, did I want that? And PlayStation delivered with Astrobot. It is everything the reviews have said. It is 10 out of 10. It's such a fun, cute little game. And it made me realize, so this is really a gym and message for Nintendo. Guys, we want another Super Mario Super Mario Odyssey. Super Mario Odyssey 2.
Or a Galaxy, honestly, I'd take it.
Or Galaxy. That's what Astrobot is. It's like Super Mario Galaxy 3 or 4 or whatever they last ended on. But this is really a ploy to Nintendo. My gym is a secret ploy. Guys, we're ready for another 3D Mario. A Super Mario Odyssey 2
Please
would
give
be
us the good
great.
shit.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely have Childish Gambino's Bando
yeah.
Stone.
Oh yeah.
Good Lord. I love Childish Gambino in general.
Yeah.
But this new album is a return to form in that I jumped in after the first album of his. So I got in on Because the Internet, and that is a 11 out of 10. That is like a perfect album in my opinion.
Nice,
I fucking love Because the Internet, 2015. Fantastic shit. Bando Stone in the New World, it to me feels like spiritually successive to that, because he's done some other stuff and not just musically. Like, yes, there's Childish Gambino between then and now. And it's very different from these two albums that I mentioned, Because the Internet and Bando Stone. But he's obviously like, Donald Glover is an actor and a writer. He's got an insane career. He's in his very
he's
successful,
a quadruple threat.
He's a multi-tuple. I don't even know how many tuples, but he's the man is active to put it very insanely mildly. So Bando Stone is a great fucking album.
You know who loves Childish Gambino is Theodore T. Buckingham. I love when we come up with ideas for future shows on the show. You should do a show with Buck about Childish Gambino.
I'm down. And then another thing I won't gush as much about because it's hopefully has spoken for itself. I feel like it got more press and is easier to look into. Alien Romulus was fucking good.
Was it good?
It was
we're still waiting to get around to it. We know we will.
Don't miss it in theaters, man. I tell you what, it's worth the theater. It's a theater movie. Really get at it.
Damn it! Maybe I should ask my wife to.
You should strongly recommend.
Do me a favor.
Yeah, it was really fucking
solid
fun.
Wife.
It very much it struck the perfect balance of knew it's a franchise. They hit some of the beats. They did the aesthetic is there. The world building is there to an extent, but again, obviously all new characters, like a fun sort of cameos and nods. Excellent acting on a specific cast member, which when you see it, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. Yeah, it was really fucking fun. I'm so happy. I went and I was like, it wasn't opening day because I'm an old piece of shit, but I went on a Friday and
we're not that old, guys.
I know, but still,
we tease ourselves.
It's in my soul. I'm both 8 and 80 at the same time inside of me. It's just that the 80-year-old wins a lot. But yeah,
With
Alien Romulus
naps.
was fun as shit. I can't give the just like the creators and just everybody like, and plus Fede Alvarez, fantastic horror director. But I
He
love
did
Evil Dead.
Evil Dead remake.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So also just I have to give a shout out to my peoples. So to the actors, to the writers, to the producers, director, like just fucking round of applause. I'm
Okay.
for it. Really
All
strongly
right.
recommend. So an album and a movie, get it in you.
Guys, check it out. And if you like that, you can always check us out at novadayproductions.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things. You can follow us at _Novo_day and days DE and at AOTB.podcast or at AOTB podcast, no dot. And if you'd like to sponsor our little love child or be on the show, you can reach out to us at novadayproductions@gmail.com. If you want to get a hold of Philip, how do they do that?
You could just text me. No, go to my website, please. It's philipchurch.com.
First, then text.
Yeah. We'll start a business relationship first, and you'll probably get the digits pretty quick. I will have a new demo coming soon. I have a new audiobook coming out soon.
Nice.
So for all the fun updates, as well as just if you think it would be fun to work with me, I would love to talk that. And there's a form through which you can contact me on my site, philipchurch.com.
So until next time, guys, we'll see you in the next one. So be good to each other. And as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Created and hosted by Novo Day and the Novo Day Collective. Facebook.com/Novo Day Media, at Novo Day Media on Twitter and Instagram. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACOMusic123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Justice, JESTUS, of thejusticecompany.com. All rights reserved.